Please hit that subscribe button and join our community to stay updated with more gripping stories like this one. The wind howled through the empty fields, carrying the faint scent of hay and earth. I trudged along the dirt path, my boots sinking into the mud from last night's rain. The fence loomed ahead, weathered and gray, stretching across the horizon. Something caught my eye, a figure slumped against it, barely moving. As I got closer, my heart sank. It was a girl, no older than 16, her wrists bound to the post with coarse rope. Her clothes were tattered, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She didn't look up as I approached, her eyes fixed on the ground. I knelt beside her, my hands trembling as I reached for the knots. Who could do this to a child? The ropes were tight, cutting into her skin, leaving angry red marks. I fumbled with them, my calloused fingers struggling to loosen the knots. She was silent, her breathing shallow, like she'd given up fighting. I whispered words of comfort, though they felt hollow even to me. The vastness of my farm stretched around us, empty and quiet. I'd lived alone for years, just me and the land. Now this girl, scared, abandoned, had stumbled into my world. I didn't know her story, but I couldn't leave her here. The rope finally gave way, and her arms fell limp. I caught her before she hit the ground. She was light as a feather, her body frail under the weight of whatever she'd been through. I carried her toward my house, a small, weathered cabin at the edge of the field. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the grass. Her eyes flickered open for a moment, meeting mine with a mix of fear and confusion. I told her my name, Amos, and promised she was safe now. The words felt strange on my tongue. Kindness wasn't something I'd practiced much. Inside, I set her on the couch, wrapping her in an old quilt. The fire crackled in the hearth, the only sound in the room. She didn't speak, just stared into the flames. I wondered what horrors she'd seen. I boiled some water and found a clean cloth to wipe the dirt from her face. Her skin was pale, almost ghostly, under the grime. She flinched at my touch, and I backed off, giving her space. I didn't know how to care for someone so broken, but I had to try. The kitchen smelled of stew I'd made earlier, and I ladled some into a bowl for her. She didn't eat at first, just held the bowl in her shaking hands. I sat across from her, my own supper untouched, watching her carefully. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, a reminder of the world she'd been left in. Slowly, she took a bite, and I felt a small relief. Night fell, and the house grew quiet except for the creak of the floorboards. I gave her my bed, the only one in the house, and made a pallet on the floor. She didn't protest, just curled up under the blankets, her eyes wide open. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Who was she? Why was she tied to that fence? The questions gnawed at me, but I didn't dare ask. Not yet. The farm had been my sanctuary, my escape from a world I didn't understand. Now it was hers too, whether she wanted it or not. I vowed to keep her safe, no matter what came next. Morning broke with a pale, gray light filtering through the curtains. She was still asleep, her breathing steadier now. I stepped outside to tend to the chores, the familiar rhythm of feeding the chickens and checking the crops. The fence stood in the distance, a grim reminder of yesterday. I wondered if she'd run off once she woke, but something told me she had nowhere to go. Back inside, I found her sitting up, clutching the quilt like a shield. Her eyes followed me, wary but curious. I offered her some bread and milk, and she took it without a word. It was a start. Days passed, and she began to open up, though her words were few. Her name was Lila, she said one morning, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't press for more, sensing the weight of her past. The farm kept us busy. There were always fences to mend, crops to water, animals to tend. She followed me sometimes, watching from a distance as I worked. I showed her how to feed the chickens, and her hands shook less each time. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like understanding. I started to see glimpses of a smile, faint but real. It warmed me more than the sun ever could. Lila began to help with small tasks, her movements hesitant but growing steadier. She'd carry buckets of water or pull weeds, her thin frame stronger than it looked. I caught her staring at the horizon sometimes, her eyes distant, like she was searching for something lost. I didn't ask what it was. I knew better than to pry. The farm was starting to feel less empty with her around, the quiet less heavy. I taught her how to plant seeds, my hands guiding hers into the soil. She listened intently, her focus a stark contrast to the broken girl I'd found. We were building something, I realized, maybe not just crops. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she spoke more than usual. Her voice was soft, but the words carried pain, hints of a family that wasn't kind, a life that pushed her to run. She didn't say much, but it was enough to piece together why she'd ended up at that fence. My chest tightened with anger at whoever had hurt her, but I kept it hidden. Instead, I told her about the farm, how I'd come here after losing my own family years ago. She listened, her eyes softening. For the first time, I felt like we were more than strangers. We were two souls finding refuge in the same place. The seasons were shifting, the air growing cooler each day. Lila had taken to wearing one of my old jackets, the sleeves too long for her arms. She looked less like a ghost now, her cheeks fuller, her eyes brighter. We worked side by side, harvesting the last of the summer crops. She laughed once, a small, fleeting sound, when a chicken chased me across the yard. I hadn't heard laughter in years, and it caught me off guard. I realized I was starting to care for her, not just as a duty, but as family. The thought scared me, but it felt right. The farm was no longer just mine, it was ours. Winter crept closer, and I worried about keeping Lila warm. The cabin was old, its walls thin against the biting wind. I spent evenings patching cracks and stacking firewood, while she helped by knitting blankets from yarn I'd found in the attic. Her fingers were quick, her focus intense, like she was pouring herself into the work. We talked more now, about small things, the weather, the animals, the stars. She asked me once why I lived alone, and I told her the truth. It was easier than facing the world. She nodded, like she understood. I wondered if she'd ever leave, and the thought stung more than I expected. One morning, I found her at the fence, staring at the spot where I'd found her. Her face was unreadable, but her hands gripped the post tightly. I didn't approach, just watched from a distance, giving her space to wrestle with whatever memories haunted her. When she came back to the house, her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. Instead, she asked if she could help with the chores. We worked in silence, the rhythm of our tasks a kind of comfort. I wanted to tell her she didn't have to carry her pain alone, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe she already knew. Lila started asking about the farm's history, curious about the land and its stories. I told her about my grandparents, who'd built this place with their own hands. I showed her the old tools in the barn, rusted but still sturdy. She listened with wide eyes, like the past was a puzzle she wanted to solve. I gave her a journal I'd found in the attic, and she started writing in it, her pen scratching late into the night. I didn't ask what she wrote. It was hers to keep. But I noticed her shoulders seemed lighter, like the words were lifting a weight. The farm was healing her, just as it had me. A storm hit one night, the worst we'd seen in years. The wind screamed, rattling the windows, and rain pounded the roof. Lila woke, startled, and I found her curled up by the fire, her eyes wide with fear. I sat beside her, telling her stories of storms I'd weathered here as a boy. She leaned against me, her breathing slowing as the fire warmed us. I realized how small she still was, how fragile beneath her growing strength. The storm passed by morning, leaving the fields muddy but alive. We stepped outside together, the air fresh and new. It felt like a promise. Lila started singing one day, a soft melody as she worked in the garden. Her voice was clear, like a bell cutting through the morning mist. I stopped to listen, leaning on my shovel, struck by how natural it felt. She didn't notice me at first, lost in her song, her hands buried in the soil. When she saw me, she blushed and stopped, but I told her to keep going. She did, and the sound filled the farm with something I hadn't known I'd missed: life. I wondered how long it had been since she'd felt safe enough to sing. I hoped it meant she was healing. We started planning for spring, sketching out where to plant new crops. Lila had ideas, bold ones, about growing flowers to sell at the market. I hadn't been to town in years, but her enthusiasm was infectious. We sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out, her pencil flying as she drew her plans. Her eyes sparkled with purpose, and I saw the girl she might have been if life hadn't been so cruel. I promised to help, though the thought of town made my stomach twist. For Lila, I'd try. She deserved a future, and I'd do what I could to give her one. One afternoon, a stranger came to the farm, a man in a truck, asking questions about a missing girl. My heart froze as he described Lila, right down to the scar on her cheek. I glanced at her, hidden in the barn, her eyes wide with panic. I told the man I hadn't seen anyone, my voice steady despite the fear. He left, but I knew he'd be back. That night, Lila told me more, about the people she'd run from, the ones who'd tied her to that fence. I held her hand, promising no one would take her from here. The farm was her home now, and I'd fight to keep it that way. We started taking precautions, keeping the gates locked and the lights low at night. Lila stayed close to the house, her confidence shaken. I hated seeing her afraid again, but I didn't know how to fix it. I taught her how to use the old rifle in the shed, just in case. Her hands shook as she held it, but her jaw was set, determined. We didn't talk about the man or what he wanted, but the weight of it hung over us. The farm, once a haven, felt fragile now, like a storm was brewing just out of sight. Still, we kept working, refusing to let fear win. Lila's journal became her refuge, pages filled with words she didn't share. I caught her writing by candlelight, her face calm but focused. I wondered if she was writing about the farm, or me, or the life she'd left behind. One day, she left the journal open, and I saw a sketch of the fence, the ropes drawn in stark detail. My throat tightened, but I didn't mention it. Instead, I left her a new pen, a small gift to show I cared. She smiled when she saw it, a real smile, and I felt the farm settle a little. We were still in this together. By late winter, Lila was stronger, her steps sure as she moved through the chores. She'd grown taller, her frame filling out, no longer the frail girl I'd found. We laughed more, shared stories over meals, the cabin warm with our voices. I taught her how to bake bread, and she taught me a song from her childhood. The farm felt alive, its rhythms tied to us both. I realized I wasn't just protecting her anymore, I was learning from her, too. She'd brought light to a place I thought would stay dark forever. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone. Spring arrived, the fields bursting with green. Lila's flower garden took shape, rows of color against the earth. She worked with a quiet joy, her hands steady as she planted each seed. I watched from the porch, my heart full in a way I couldn't explain. The man in the truck hadn't returned, but we stayed cautious, always watching the road. Lila didn't talk about her past much, but I saw it in her eyes sometimes, a shadow that lingered. I wanted to erase it, to give her a life without fear. The farm was her home, but I wondered if it could ever be enough. One morning, Lila asked to go to town, to sell her flowers at the market. I hesitated, the thought of strangers making my skin crawl. But her eyes were bright, her voice firm, and I couldn't say no. We loaded the truck with her blooms, their scent filling the air. In town, she moved with confidence, talking to customers, her smile disarming. I stayed back, watching her shine, a proud ache in my chest. She wasn't the scared girl from the fence anymore. She was Lila, building a life from the ground up. I realized I'd do anything to protect that. The market became a routine, a weekly trip that Lila loved. She made friends with the vendors, her laughter carrying over the stalls. I kept my distance, but I saw how people were drawn to her, her warmth a magnet. Back at the farm, she'd tell me about the day, her words spilling out like a river. I listened, amazed at how far she'd come. The farm was thriving, too, the crops strong, the animals healthy. It felt like we'd built something real, not just a home, but a future. I wondered if she'd stay forever, or if the world would call her away. One night, Lila showed me her journal, pages filled with drawings and words. She read me a passage about the farm, her voice steady as she described the fence, the fields, the stars. It wasn't just a story, it was her heart, laid bare. I felt tears prick my eyes, something I hadn't felt in years. She hugged me, her arms strong, and I hugged her back, my throat tight. The farm had saved us both, I realized, in ways I hadn't expected. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were living. And for the first time, that felt like enough. Summer came, the days long and warm. Lila's garden was a riot of color, drawing neighbors we hadn't seen in years. They brought gifts, jams, pies, stories, and Lila welcomed them, her smile bright. I watched from the porch, my heart swelling with pride. She'd turned the farm into a place of connection, something I'd never managed alone. We worked together, harvesting crops, tending flowers, our hands moving in sync. The fence stood in the distance, a memory we didn't speak of. It was part of our story, but it didn't define us anymore. Lila started talking about the future, her voice full of dreams. She wanted to study, maybe become a teacher, to help kids like her. I listened, nodding, though the thought of her leaving ached. I told her she could do anything, that the farm would always be here if she needed it. She smiled, her eyes soft, and said she'd never forget this place. I believed her. The farm had become part of her, just as she'd become part of me. We were family, not by blood, but by something deeper. The land had bound us together. One evening, as we sat under the stars, Lila asked me if I was happy. The question caught me off guard, and I had to think. I told her I was, that she'd brought light to a life I thought was done. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat in silence, the night wrapping around us. I thought about the fence, the ropes, the girl I'd found. She was gone now, replaced by someone strong, someone whole. I wasn't just a lonely farmer anymore. I was Amos, her protector, her friend. And that was enough. The man in the truck never came back, but we didn't let our guard down. Lila carried herself with a quiet strength, her eyes always scanning the horizon. I taught her more about the land, about surviving, about thriving. She soaked it up, her mind sharp, her heart open. The farm was ours, a sanctuary we'd built together. I wondered what my grandparents would think, seeing their land alive with hope again. I liked to think they'd be proud. Lila had brought their legacy back to life, in ways I never could alone. As fall approached, Lila started planning for the next market season. She had big ideas. New crops, more flowers, maybe a stall of her own. I promised to help, though I knew she didn't need me as much anymore. She was growing into someone fierce, someone unstoppable. I watched her work, her hands steady, her smile bright, and I felt a quiet peace. The farm had been my refuge, but it was her future now. I'd given her a home, and she'd given me a purpose. We were even, I thought, in the best possible way. The fence still stands, weathered but strong, a reminder of where this all began. Lila walks past it sometimes, her head high, no trace of fear. I watch her, my heart full, knowing she's found her place. The farm is alive with her laughter, her songs, her dreams. I don't know what the years will bring, but I know this, she's not alone anymore, and neither am I. We've built a life here, against all odds. The world tried to break her, but she's stronger than it. And I'll be here, always, to make sure she knows it. If you loved this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt tales that will keep you coming back.